Let's start by talking about requirements. We write software, right? And what software do we write? How do we know what we're supposed to do? Well, we know what we have to do because somebody tells us generally what we want to do. Hopefully it will be our customers, it may be our product owner or business analyst, and whenever they tell us what to do, there are some questions that we are going to have to ask when we sit down at our desks and we write some code, or maybe we're testers and we're going to write test plans, and we have to think to ourselves, have the people that asked us to do this thought about all the edge cases? Have they thought about whether things are true? And these questions come up time and time again. I'm sure that you've all experienced the fact that you're sitting down at your desk trying to do something, and this question pops up, and you have to go and ask somebody, what was it that you were expecting me to do in this situation? And the classic way of asking that question is, can you give me an example of how you expected this to behave? Because any other question that you ask, if it's not a concrete example, is going to be abstract to some degree and thus susceptible to ambiguity and misunderstanding, which you'll get closer to understanding what they want, but you won't necessarily get all the way there. And example mapping is a technique that was developed by Matt Wynn maybe 8 years or so ago, when he was working with some clients. He went in and they were having real problems getting their user stories to a level of refinement that they could develop them, deliver them without going round and round, backwards and forwards between the development team and the product team. And he happened to have a deck of 4 colored cards, those index cards in his pocket, and example mapping just fell out. So what he did was he got them to write the story. So in Agile, a lot of increments of functionality are delivered underneath a heading of what's often called user stories, and he got them to write the title of the story on the yellow card, and then he asked them to write the acceptance criteria that they'd identified on blue cards, and he spread the blue cards out underneath the story card, and then he invited the people in the room, and in that particular situation, it was what's a group of people known as the Three Amigos, which is essentially a representative sample of people with the development perspective, people with a test or QA perspective, and people with a product perspective. He asked the people with the developer and the tester perspective to interrogate their understanding of those acceptance criteria by writing concrete examples on green cards. As in, I think that in this situation it should behave like this. You put it underneath the blue card and you ask the product owner, is that right or not? And the product owner has to think about it and just give an answer. Is that correct? If so, that's fine. It's a concrete example of how the system should behave that disambiguates the acceptance criteria that it illustrates. And if that's not how the product owner wants it to behave, then they correct it. The other thing that we've often seen in all forms of meetings is that if you have more than one person in a room and there is some disagreement about how a system should behave, rather than getting to a definitive answer, you might easily spend 15 minutes with everyone expressing their opinion about how it might be best for it to behave. And at the end of that, you're none the wiser. And so Matt had these, they weren't actually red cards, they were purple cards left over. And he suggested that if you find a discussion is taking place that lasts more than 30 seconds, write the concept of what's being discussed on a red card, park that discussion so that someone can take ownership of that red card and go and get it answered definitively by somebody who actually knows what the answer should be, and bring it back to the next example mapping session. The links on the slide will take you to the Matt's blog post that describes the example mapping process in some detail, and the YouTube is a real live, a sample example mapping session recorded. You may have noticed that the blue cards say rule on them, and I've been saying acceptance criteria, so I just should disambiguate that. We believe that acceptance criteria, requirement, and rule are synonyms. In the 20 minutes I've got allotted, I have no time to argue the toss with you about that if you disagree. So come and get me at the bar. But for now, this is what we mean. When we say rule, it could be your business requirement, or it could be your acceptance criteria, but basically it's a statement that describes one aspect of system behavior. So let me show you a sample rule. This comes from the domain of public lending libraries. Certainly in the UK, as far as I'm aware, public lending libraries where they haven't been closed still allow you to borrow books for free. So you join the library, you wander in, you put the book that you want off the shelf, and with your card, you borrow it and have to bring it back at some specified time in the future. So this lending library has been suffering from the deprivations of underfunding for many years from local councils, and has decided to charge people for the right to reserve items that aren't there. So if the latest, well, I was about to say Harry Potter, but that dates me. I don't know what the current go-to books are. But if the latest book that you want to read is not available at the library because someone has borrowed it, and you're not able to go back to the library every half hour to see whether it's been returned, you can reserve it by paying a fee. And they will hold the book for you and notify you when it's available. So this is the rule that we're going to be talking about, or I'm going to use as an exemplar. So what I've just described here is reserving a book at a library. So it's free to take out books, but you have to pay $1 or £1 if you want to reserve an item that's currently out at loan. So at the beginning of the example mapping session, and here I'm simplifying it massively because, well, 20 minutes and it's just an introduction. So we have the story, which is the library or the board has decided they want to apply reservation charges to library members. And the rule here is that members will pay a reservation charge of $1. So we go into this room to run an example mapping session. We have the three amigos there, so which means we have at least one representative of the customer, which would be typically either a product owner or a business analyst. We have one representative or one or more representatives of the developer community. We have one or more representatives of the test or QA community. And at this point, having introduced the story to the three amigos, the testers and developers begin by thinking about examples of how this rule might act out once it was implemented. So it's a process of imagining how the system should behave. So let's imagine that some developer comes up with an idea. Andrew reserves a book. He's charged $1. And the product owner looks at that and goes, yeah, that's what I would expect. Then there's a tester in the room, and they come up with a thought that said, well, Andrew reserves 2 books. He's charged $1. So the product owner looks at that and goes, no, actually, I had intended that if you reserved 2 books, you would be charged $2. Seems straightforward. And the tester points out, well, that's not what your rule says. Your rule just says members pay a reservation charge of $1, at which point we refine the rule. So this is a process, I mean, this is trivial, right? You'll be going there, yeah, we could have done that easily at our own desks. But this is just an example of things that come out every time I've ever run an example mapping session. And the reality is that we have a level of assumption of what our shared understanding of what we're saying that way outreaches the actual understanding that we have of each other. And if I wanted to use kitschy, trashy, dated memes, I would have a picture here of 3 people with a little circle above their head, a triangle above their head, and a square above their head, which I'm sure you've seen before. Which is people talk about things and you think you know what they're talking about, but you have translated it into your own mental model of the world that you think we're talking about. Whereas concrete examples typically rely on concrete data in the business domain, and it flushes out those misunderstandings. The tester, though, here in this example is on a roll. They've got the product owner to refine the business rule. So they now ask another question, which is there a limit to the number of books that somebody can reserve? That's pretty critical, right? I mean, the library they would love to have $1,000 paid to them, but it's probably not an effective way of doing it, and it's probably not fair to the library clientele to allow people to reserve 1,000 items at a time. But the reality is that the product owner hasn't thought about this. And so we capture that idea, that question on a red card. The product owner takes ownership of the red card and leaves the example mapping meeting when it finishes with the card, with a commitment to go to the stakeholders and ask them what the limit should be. Should it be, well, who knows what it should be? He's committed, or he or she is committed to get that answer and bring it back to the next example mapping meeting. So that's the basis of example mapping. It looks really trivial, I don't know how many of you are sitting there thinking, why would I bother with this? All I can tell you is that in every professional arena that I have done this in, it has delivered massive value. And it's actually not quite as simple to enact as I have shown it to be, because people far prefer to jaw than write examples. And so one of the first things you have to do if you're facilitating an example mapping session is to ensure that people don't just start there and talk through things. You actually communicate initially through the medium of a concrete example written on an example card. So next, what I'd like to do is just go through what an example looks like. All examples are made up of 3 parts: a context, an action, and an outcome. This is not something I've made up. This is how examples in the real world exist. If you think about teaching somebody, a young person, that a flame of a candle is hot and will burn, then you might say that the context is, given the candle is lit, when I put my hand over the candle, then my hand gets burnt. And all examples are framed like this. There are always 3 segments to it. In this particular example, the sample that we're looking at just now, the example that we wrote down on the card is Andrew reserves a book, he is charged $1. And in that situation, the action is that Andrew is reserving a book. What's the outcome? He gets charged $1. Now, there's no context here. And there's no context, at least there's nothing written on the green card at the moment that indicates a context. However, if you look up at the rule that this example was illustrating, you can see that it's library members that are charged $1 for reserving a book. So the context actually here is that Andrew is a library member. This structure is extremely valuable. We get to a point now where we have created an example, we've captured it in business language, and if you attended my session yesterday, you'll see the mapping here from discovery through to formulation into the Gherkin language. And from here, we can automate it using tools like Cucumber. However, I don't want to talk about that. What I do want to talk about is the visual feedback that example mapping gives you. Because example mapping has already, I believe, delivered value. It's delivered value by getting us to a place of shared understanding. But let's look at this, this example map. If you've got a story with 2 rules underneath it, but no examples, it is quite clear that it is not ready to be pulled into your current iteration. Don't start working on this story yet, because you haven't yet been through discovery. You currently don't, you have no confidence, or at least you should have no confidence, that there's a shared understanding across the team about what should be delivered. If, however, you go into a discovery session, you do example mapping, and you come up with lots of concrete examples, but you find that there are some examples that you come up with that don't appear to illustrate any of the rules that you have yet identified, well, you've got a missing rule. This is extremely common, right? This is maybe there's something that the product owner knows or assumes that they haven't articulated that the development team need to know about. It may be actually something that the development team, and they've created the examples, the development team know about, they've created examples to illustrate it, but the product owner hadn't been aware of it. This shows us that we had incomplete knowledge at the beginning of this session. So we create a rule that describes this assumption or this missing requirement, capture it, and now we've got a better example map. If we have any question cards that are unanswered, this story is not ready. There are too many unknowns for us to pull it into our next iteration to start working on it. There are ways we could split the story potentially to make it deliverable, but just right now, the simplest thing to say is if you've got question cards outstanding, do not proceed with this until those questions are answered, because those questions may have a massive impact on what you actually need to implement. If you end up with lots and lots of rules underneath the card, you have got what is quite common in the industry, which is a story that is too large. And the wonderful thing about working in this way is that it's very simple to split the story. because you just identify the rules that seem to be cohesive, or you ask your product owner to identify the rules that are most critical for the next iteration, and you just move them aside and you put them under a different story card. Splitting the story is as simple as choosing which rules that you want to implement and giving them its own yellow card. At this point in the user story journey process, the user story is simply a bucket for delivering the next minor increment of functionality. And so this is a facilitative process for allowing you to split your stories until they are in fact small and deliverable. And then finally, if you have a story with, and this is a heuristic that I find useful, but around, no more than 3 rules underneath it, and each rule has 2 or more examples illustrating it, then it's potentially ready. And what we do is we ask the team at this point to do Roman voting on whether they are confident that they really understand what's being done. So we get thumbs up, thumbs down, not sure. If you've got any thumbs down, well, that means there's an example that someone has thought of that they haven't yet written on a green card. They may not know that they haven't thought of it, but that's what it means, because if you're not sure, then that means you've got some doubt. And if you've got some doubt, you should express it as an example. To wrap up, in my experience, example mapping should be short. The way I want this to work and the way I've seen it work best is that the meeting is 30 minutes or less. Long meetings suck. I'm not going to let anyone argue with me about that. Long meetings suck, so we want short meetings. Example mapping actually requires huge amount of cognitive input. You're supposed to be doing your coding job or your test plan writing job at the table, just looking at pieces of card and then writing down what you're thinking about on green pieces of paper to interrogate your understanding of the problem. This is hard work. 30 minutes is more than enough. You'll probably want to do 45 minutes or an hour when you start. People always do. But let's do 30 minutes. That's the target to aim for. Short, sharp, intense sessions. I schedule example mapping daily after stand-up. Not everyone in the team needs to go, although in the early days of adopting example mapping, I encourage the whole team to attend. Nonetheless, daily meetings of 30 minutes will get you to a point where you have a rich backlog of stories that are ready to be brought into your next iteration, so that when you come to your next sprint planning, if you're working in Scrum, or when you want to pull something off of the backlog, if you're working in Kanban, you have things that are prioritized and fully understood and ready to be pulled. In the unlikely situation that you have already gotten through enough stories and you've got nothing left, that your backlog has got enough on it for the next 6 weeks or whatever, or however long it is, then cancel the 30-minute meeting after the stand-up. Nobody I've ever met has ever complained of a meeting being cancelled and being allowed to go and do something else that they want to do. However, if you find that you desperately need to get a new story refined and ready for work, and you have to then schedule a new meeting, you will be pulling your hair out trying to find time to get the right people in the room. So a 30-minute session scheduled after each stand-up has been my go-to approach. Every red card should have an owner by the end of the session. That's non-negotiable, because as you know, if no one's accountable, it won't get answered. The first card said that the session should be short, and I explained that was because it's a high bandwidth, high intensity meeting. To facilitate you being able to start that 30 minutes, hit the ground running, as the old job ads used to say, your product owner should really be responsible, or encouraged anyway, of notifying the team the day before about what story or stories will be at the example mapping session tomorrow. In the first instance, that gives them the chance to think about the problem domain. It gives them a chance to get their heads in the space, maybe read up on previous stories so that they know what's already been implemented. Once you become a more advanced team, it also allows them to self-select. If you've got 3 developers, maybe only 1 or 2 of them need to come along, and the other one will go off and work on some other tasks. So if they know what's going to be discussed, it allows for a degree of self-organization. So that plays into this one, which is that not everyone need attend. As I said, when teams start doing example mapping, I actually think it's beneficial if everybody does attend, because then you get to a common way of working. If, however, as you get better and you get a common way of working, then I suggest to apply the dinner party rule of having 6 or fewer, because if you have more than 6 people, there will be more than one conversation going on. It's the 3 amigos, business, dev, and test need to come along. It's the product owner or business analyst's responsibility to bring along the story and the candidate rules. The blue cards are only candidates because, as we saw in the sample, they may get refined and changed, or new ones might get created. The product owner and business analyst are quite welcome to think about examples while they're preparing the story, but they should not bring or offer those examples in the session. In the session, it's the job of the delivery team, the technical developers, the experienced testers, to drag that knowledge, to drag that understanding from the product owner or business analyst by coming up with their own examples. Don't talk, write the examples first rather than talking. And finally, it's a priority, as I said, to really make use of these 30 minutes and write and work on examples in a high bandwidth way. And there are many different ways of writing examples on these cards, but one of the ways that I absolutely recommend that you do not do it is by trying to go straight to the Gherkin format of given, when, then, because that's a writing approach. That's a way of structuring. That's a way of structuring it as documentation. And writing documentation is a completely different art and takes more time than we should be spending in a high bandwidth example mapping session.